Ava Turner stood in front of the camera, adjusting her black hoodie that bore the slogan "Save the Earth, Save the Animals." It was a cold morning in downtown Los Angeles, but her energy was anything but frozen. As she stared into the lens, her voice took on the kind of passionate tone that had made her a rising star in the world of online activism. "Every piece of meat you eat is blood on your hands," she said, her eyes unwavering, as if every word were a judgment she had lived and breathed. "We cannot keep turning a blind eye to the pain we cause when we consume animals for pleasure. The earth is burning, and it's on us to stop it." Behind her, a group of protesters stood with signs that mirrored her message. They were chanting in unison, echoing her words with a fervor that only reinforced the power of her voice. This was Ava's world, a world where she had built a platform through bold statements, relentless campaigns, and viral videos. She was everywhere, on social media, in the press, on every newsfeed advocating for veganism and animal rights. At 28, Ava had become a face for the new wave of activism, a movement driven by the belief that humanity's obsession with meat was destroying the planet and slaughtering countless innocent lives. Her online presence was massive, with millions of followers hanging on her every word. From Instagram to Twitter, YouTube to TikTok, Ava's name was synonymous with righteous indignation. She could tear down the most famous restaurants for serving foie gras and expose the horrors of factory farming in ways that left the public gasping. But there was something the camera didn't see, something the world didn't know. Ava was no stranger to controversy. Her viral tirades against meat eaters, fast food chains, and anyone who supported industries she deemed inhumane made her a lightning rod for both praise and criticism. People either adored her for standing up for the voiceless or hated her for her unrelenting judgment. The insults from her detractors were harsh. "Holier than thou," they'd call her, "preachy vegan queen." But none of this fazed Ava. She was right, they were wrong, and her mission was more important than their petty complaints. In her world, there was no room for compromise. She championed ethical consumerism, advocating for cruelty-free products, plant-based diets, and sustainability. Yet, with every video she posted, every protest she organized, Ava's influence grew, and with it, her need for the recognition she so fervently sought. The conflict began to creep in slowly, like a shadow at the corner of her eye. Ava's personal life, one that she kept tightly under wraps, was far from the image she projected. Beneath the carefully crafted veneer of a saintly figure fighting for animal rights, there were darker realities lurking in the wings. Ava was connected to one of the most popular vegan food companies in the market. The same company that marketed itself as ethical, sustainable, and cruelty-free was under investigation for a series of worker exploitation allegations. The company's workers were reportedly underpaid, overworked, and denied basic rights. And yet, Ava, despite being a vocal advocate for fairness and justice, had ignored the mounting complaints and whistleblowers within the company. She had turned a blind eye, all for the sake of the bigger picture, her personal success. But there were whispers, small murmurs on social media and among activists. Some began to question Ava's true motivations, and they weren't just talking about the food she endorsed. They were talking about her role in perpetuating a system that claimed to fight for the oppressed while quietly exploiting those on the fringes. As Ava stood in front of the camera, delivering her usual speech, she felt a flicker of unease deep inside. It was faint, like the calm before a storm, but it was there. She hadn't noticed it before, but now, as the harsh lights hit her face and the crowd cheered, a thought crept into her mind: what if they find out? What if they find out that Ava Turner, the activist who demanded transparency from the meat industry, was hiding her own dark secret? The irony was glaring, but Ava had always been able to bury the truth under layers of justifications. She had justified the occasional mistake, the minor compromises. After all, it was for the greater good. But now, with every post, every speech, she was walking a tightrope. And the fall, when it came, would be far from graceful. Ava had created a movement, but in doing so, she had built herself a cage. Would she remain the hero of her own story, or would the world see her for what she really was, a hypocrite just like the one she so vehemently condemned? As the crowd cheered her name and the cameras flashed, Ava smiled. She had no idea just how much longer that smile would last. Ava Turner's online presence was a carefully curated masterpiece, a digital empire built on righteous indignation and unapologetic activism. Every post, every tweet, every video she shared reinforced her image as the unflinching voice of the voiceless, the warrior for the planet, and the defender of animals. Her feed was an endless reel of fiery calls to action, confrontational memes, and hard-hitting videos, all meticulously designed to stir the pot and challenge her followers to take a stand. Every morning, Ava woke up to a flood of messages, likes, shares, and comments pouring in from her millions of followers. Her Instagram account alone had more than 4 million subscribers, each one hanging on her every word. She posted regularly, photos of her at rallies, selfies with activists she'd met, and, of course, the meticulously staged images of her vegan meals, plates of vibrant salads, plant-based burgers, and bowls of grain-filled delights. These were all designed to highlight her perfect vegan lifestyle, showcasing that her commitment to animal rights was all-encompassing, even in her personal choices. But it wasn't just food that Ava was promoting, it was an entire ideology. She was a queen in the world of cancel culture, using her platform to expose businesses, celebrities, and even everyday people who were caught in the act of supporting animal exploitation. Ava didn't just report on the atrocities, she made it personal. One of her most viral videos, "The Truth Behind Your Steak," had exposed the cruelty of meat production with stark footage of factory farms. It was a masterpiece of editing, a mix of gut-wrenching animal footage paired with Ava's impassioned narration. "You're complicit," she had told her audience directly, "every time you pick up that burger, you're part of the problem." The video had gone viral, racking up millions of views and sparking debates everywhere. Meat eaters were furious, calling her overzealous and preachy, but Ava didn't care. She had already won, the world was talking about her, and the message was clear. Her followers adored her for her unwavering commitment. Ava was the voice of reason in a sea of ignorance. Her most loyal fans followed her lead, going vegan, participating in her online challenges, and standing up to the industry giants she had so effectively demonized. She hosted monthly vegan challenges, encouraging her followers to go plant-based for a month, complete with instructional guides, meal plans, and motivational posts to keep them on track. But the more successful Ava became, the more polarizing she became as well. The comments under her posts began to shift. At first, it was the occasional voice of dissent, a snarky comment here and there. But soon, it was entire threads dedicated to criticizing her. "Not everyone has the privilege of going vegan," one comment read. "You know that, right? Not everyone can afford your $15 avocado toast." Another post challenged her, "Ava, you talk about animal rights, but you've never once mentioned the rights of the workers in the vegan food factories. Why don't you take a look at that hypocrisy?" Ava had read these comments. She had seen them multiply, one after another. But she refused to let them get to her. "They don't get it," she would mutter to herself. "They're just jealous. They don't have the courage to speak the truth like I do." Still, a tiny seed of doubt lingered in the back of her mind. She had always claimed that her activism was about saving the world, about standing up for the powerless and the oppressed. But was she really helping? Was she part of the problem, too? Could she truly be a champion for animal rights when her own lifestyle was built on something just as exploitative? But these moments of doubt were fleeting. Ava was too wrapped up in her persona as the unwavering activist to acknowledge them. Her role model status, her platform, her brand, it was all too important. The backlash, the criticism, even the whispers of hypocrisy, none of it could take away the cause she had dedicated herself to. She would not let it. Instead, Ava doubled down. She became even more vocal in her condemnation of anyone who dared to challenge her. On Twitter, she responded to critics with biting sarcasm, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize your privilege was more important than saving the planet." She launched tirades against celebrities who promoted eating meat, turning their public missteps into opportunities to broadcast her own moral superiority. "They talk about having it all," she tweeted about a famous chef known for his steakhouse, "but they're actually having it all at the expense of everything else." Her campaigns grew bolder. Ava organized massive protests outside major meat processing plants, demanding accountability for the industries that supported animal cruelty. She hosted live-streamed events where she called out restaurants for their use of animal products, often in confrontational ways. Yet beneath her defiance, the cracks were starting to show. Ava's perfect vegan persona was starting to erode. Critics began to point out the inconsistencies in her lifestyle. Her clothing, her accessories, her vegan food packaging, it was all part of a machine, a multi-billion-dollar industry that was profiting off her activism. She was a symbol, a brand, more than she was a true activist. Ava heard the rumblings of this growing controversy, but she couldn't face it. Instead, she chose to ignore the contradictions and focus on the next big event. A new video, a new protest, a new campaign, anything to keep the conversation on her terms. Because in Ava's world, the truth was simple: she was right, and anyone who disagreed with her was part of the problem. Even if it meant ignoring the reality of her own actions, the stage was set for a reckoning. But Ava couldn't see it. She had built her empire on her righteousness, and it would take more than a few voices to shake her from the illusion of moral superiority she had so carefully crafted. It began like any other day for Ava Turner, with the familiar hum of notifications lighting up her phone. But that morning, there was a sense of unease in the air, a tension that seemed to buzz just under the surface of her usual social media triumphs. The first clue came through a tweet, buried in the comments of one of her latest viral posts. It was simple, but sharp. Asterisk: how does Ava Turner justify her silence about the workers who make the food she promotes? Does she only care about animals? What about the people? Asterisk. Ava scrolled past it, dismissing it as another baseless attack from the haters who didn't understand her cause. But then came more. On Twitter, a new hashtag was beginning to trend, #AvaTurnerHypocrite. At first, it was a few isolated tweets, but within hours, the hashtag exploded across multiple platforms. Articles began popping up on news sites with titles like "Vegan Queen Ava Turner linked to exploitative labor practices" and *activists' empire built on the back of undervalued workers. Confused, Ava clicked on one of the articles. It was a detailed exposé by a journalist named Sophie Bellamy, known for her hard-hitting investigations into corporate corruption. Sophie had traced the connections between Ava's campaign for ethical veganism and a growing controversy surrounding a popular vegan food production company, Pure Plant Foods Star. The company had recently come under fire for allegations of worker exploitation, low wages, poor working conditions, and alleged mistreatment of staff in their factories. The article stated that Ava had been directly involved with Pure Plant Foods, not just as an advocate but as an investor, a silent partner in the company. While Ava had been promoting the vegan food company as a shining example of ethical business, Sophie's research revealed a darker truth. Ava had known about the workers' complaints but had chosen to ignore them, or worse, to cover them up. She had been receiving a cut of the profits, all while positioning herself as the moral compass of the vegan movement. Ava's stomach dropped as she read through the details. Sophie had uncovered not just her ties to the company but also the testimony of former employees who had claimed Ava's involvement in hiring decisions that kept wages low and the working conditions poor. Ava had turned a blind eye to the injustice for the sake of her brand. The facts were damning. Ava's attempts to silence the accusations only made things worse. Her PR team issued a generic statement denying the allegations, but that only fueled the fire. Activists who once saw her as a role model began to publicly distance themselves. "You can't fight for animal rights and ignore human rights," one former ally tweeted. Another one wrote, "Ava Turner's activism was never about animals. It was about her empire." She sold out. Ava's phone buzzed constantly with angry messages, even from people she had once considered friends. Some tried to reason with her, others lashed out, disgusted by her hypocrisy. Her comments on Instagram and Twitter were flooded with backlash. "You told us to be ethical consumers, Ava," one person wrote. "But it turns out you're just another greedy capitalist with a vegan twist." The most painful part, though, was the realization that the people who had once looked up to her were now questioning everything. Ava was no longer the voice of righteousness, she was becoming the villain. She had built her reputation on being the moral high ground, yet here she was, caught in a scandal that exposed her as just another hypocrite. Her followers, those who had proudly taken part in her campaigns and even sworn off meat and dairy, were disillusioned. They began to ask, had we been misled? In an attempt to defend herself, Ava took to social media, posting a desperate video, her voice trembling with defiance. "These are lies," she insisted. "I've always fought for what's right. This is just a smear campaign, a way to discredit me because I've exposed the truth about animal cruelty. I have never, and I will never, stand for exploitation of animals or humans." But the cracks were already showing. Her words felt rehearsed, hollow. She tried to double down on her clean image, telling her followers that she was actively working to fix the situation at Pure Plant Foods, but no one seemed convinced. The hashtag #AvaTurnerHypocrite continued to spread, now with thousands of people joining in. To make matters worse, Sophie Bellamy's investigation was gaining traction. The journalist had managed to get an exclusive interview with a former Pure Plant Foods employee, who detailed how Ava's involvement in the company went beyond simply being a passive investor. According to the whistleblower, Ava had used her influence to block initiatives that could have improved worker conditions, all while continuing to promote the company as a model of vegan ethics. The accusations were now more than just rumors, they were facts, backed by evidence. And the more Ava tried to defend herself, the more she was sinking into a hole of her own making. But Ava wasn't ready to admit defeat. She refused to acknowledge her contradictions. She had built an empire on the illusion of purity, and she couldn't let it fall apart. Instead, she focused all her energy on discrediting Sophie and the whistleblower, calling them liars and opportunists. In her mind, it was a calculated attack on her ideals, a conspiracy to undermine everything she stood for. But the damage had been done. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and now, her public persona was crumbling, piece by piece. Ava had always prided herself on being a voice for the oppressed, but now, it seemed, she was just another cog in a much larger, more exploitative machine. The world was watching. And with every new revelation, Ava's carefully constructed image began to unravel. Ava Turner sat alone in her high-rise apartment, the city lights casting long shadows on the walls. It was late, far later than she should have been awake, but sleep refused to come. The endless barrage of messages, tweets, and articles weighing on her had become unbearable. She stared blankly at her phone, reading through the latest headlines: Ava Turner, Hypocrisy Unmasked, and Activists' Vegan Empire Built on Exploitation. The words were like a punch to the gut, each one reinforcing the same ugly truth that she couldn't escape. Her carefully constructed image was crumbling. She rubbed her temples, trying to clear the fog of guilt that had settled over her mind. How had it come to this? She had always believed in what she was doing. She was the voice for animals, the face of a movement that was supposed to change the world. Her life had been built on fighting for justice, real justice. She had preached the sanctity of life, both human and animal. She had built her platform on the idea that the system was broken, and she was the one who could fix it. But now, it felt like the entire foundation of her cause was built on a lie. Her fingers hovered over the screen, shaking slightly as she scrolled through the responses to her latest post, the one where she tried to defend herself. There were still the diehard followers who clung to the narrative she had spun. They posted comments like, "You're still our hero, Ava. Don't let them tear you down, and they're just jealous. Keep fighting." But they were growing fewer in number. More and more voices were beginning to echo the same refrain: "How could you not know? How could you let this happen?" Her mind raced as the weight of the accusations settled on her chest like a lead weight. She thought about the former employees of Pure Plant Foods, people who had spoken out, telling their stories of being overworked, underpaid, and mistreated. Some had even claimed that Ava had been directly involved in hiring decisions, that she had turned a blind eye to the workers suffering for the sake of maintaining her image as the ethical vegan. Ava squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the thoughts. She had known about the complaints. She had heard the whispers. But it had been so much easier to ignore them. Her career, her brand, it was all too important. She couldn't afford to let something as messy as worker rights derail her cause. And besides, the company was still producing vegan food, wasn't it? Food that was cruelty-free, That was what mattered most. Her guilt gnawed at her, but she pushed it away, telling herself that the bigger picture mattered more than her personal shortcomings. Her fight for the planet, for the animals, it was bigger than any mistake she had made. Wasn't it? But the guilt wouldn't go away. It was there in every moment of silence, in every mirror she looked into. The guilt sat with her at breakfast, when she made her smoothie with almond milk and vegan protein powder, and when she sat down to respond to her followers, trying to maintain the image she had built. It was there during the interviews she gave, when she was asked about the controversy surrounding pure plant foods. She told them she was working on it, that she was taking responsibility, but her words felt hollow, even to herself. The silence in her apartment felt suffocating. The once familiar hum of her social media accounts now felt like a distant echo, each notification a reminder of the backlash she was facing. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her PR team, another scripted response to send to the press. But it didn't matter. Nothing she said could undo what had already been done. Ava stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth across the room. She had to keep moving, keep pushing forward. That's what she had always done, right? It was the only way to survive. She grabbed her phone again, scrolling through the messages. Some were still supportive, but the cracks were showing. The requests for answers were growing louder. People wanted real answers. Not the vague, non-committal responses she had been offering. Why didn't you do more? How could you justify being involved with a company like that? You're just like everyone else. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Lily, one of the first vegan activists who had helped her get her start. They had been close, once, sharing a vision for a better world, fighting for the same causes. But now, Lily's message was a sharp contrast to the past. Ava, I can't support this. You knew about what was happening at Pure Plant, and you did nothing. What happened to the person I believed in? I can't stay silent anymore. Ava felt a lump form in her throat. Lily's words hit harder than any of the trolls on Twitter. Lily had always been the one who reminded her why they were doing this in the first place, for the animals, for the planet. Now, even Lily was turning away. Ava tossed the phone onto the couch, walking over to the window, staring out at the city below. She couldn't hear the voices outside, but inside her head, they were deafening. The doubts were growing, swelling up inside her chest until they threatened to swallow her whole. Was she still the person she had once claimed to be? Or had she become the very thing she had fought against, someone willing to exploit others for personal gain, to put their suffering aside in the name of a bigger cause? The truth was becoming harder to ignore. Ava was not the hero she had always imagined herself to be. The mirror she had so carefully crafted, the persona she had built up for years, was beginning to crack. The foundation beneath her feet was crumbling, and no matter how hard she tried to hold on to the narrative, she couldn't escape the reality that was now staring her in the face. She sank to the floor, her back against the cold glass of the window. It was as if the weight of the world had come crashing down on her, and she couldn't breathe. She had spent so long shaming others for their lack of moral clarity, but now, she was the one caught in the contradiction. For the first time in a long time, Ava wasn't sure who she was anymore. The day the investigation broke was a whirlwind. Ava had barely had time to process the latest wave of backlash before another bombshell hit the media. This time, it was not just whispers or accusations, this was an expose. Sophie Bellamy, the investigative journalist who had already begun to stir the pot with her initial article, had dug deeper, a lot deeper. Her latest piece, Ava Turner's Dark Side, The Hidden Truth Behind Her Vegan Empire, had just been published, and within hours, it had gone viral. The article was a damning dissection of Ava's role in Pure Plant Foods, the vegan food company she had promoted as the pinnacle of ethical production. Sophie had uncovered a wealth of documents, email trails, and interviews with former employees that painted a picture of an entirely different reality than the one Ava had been peddling. It wasn't just that Ava had turned a blind eye to the complaints about poor working conditions. Sophie's investigation revealed that Ava had been a key player in maintaining those conditions. She had been a part of the decision-making process, ensuring that workers' wages stayed low to maximize profits. Ava had been aware of the exploitation, but her loyalty to Pure Plant Foods, and the money it brought in had blinded her to the very principles she had built her public persona on. The article included internal memos that showed Ava's direct involvement in negotiating supplier contracts that underpaid workers, especially in the factories that produced the very plant-based products she had endorsed so vehemently. Sophie's sources described how Ava had even dismissed worker protests, framing them as unfortunate but necessary in order to keep the company profitable. For the first time, Ava could no longer deny her complicity. Sophie's sources, former employees who had seen Ava's name on paperwork, who had been in meetings where she had signed off on policies that further exploited workers, spoke out. The journalists had even managed to get their hands on a recording of an internal meeting where Ava dismissed the importance of improving factory conditions, instead focusing on maintaining the company's image in the public eye. Ava's stomach lurched when she read the article. The words on the screen felt like a hammer to her chest, each line digging deeper into the reality she had worked so hard to hide. For the first time, she was faced with undeniable evidence of her hypocrisy. There was no spinning this, no clever PR maneuver to erase it. Her actions were exposed for what they were, greed masked by the guise of activism. But Ava wasn't ready to accept defeat. Not yet. Within hours of the article's release, Ava posted a carefully crafted statement on her social media accounts. She denied the most severe allegations, blaming them on a coordinated smear campaign from haters who wanted to tear down everything she had worked for. She claimed the documents Sophie had uncovered were misinterpreted and accused the former employees of fabricating their stories in exchange for money or attention. "You all know the truth," Ava wrote in a series of posts. "I've always fought for the voiceless. I've always stood against exploitation. This is just a calculated attempt to distract from the real issues, the destruction of our planet, the abuse of animals, and the unsustainable practices of the meat industry. I will not back down. I will not let these lies define me." But her words felt weak, desperate even. They didn't carry the conviction that her previous posts had. It was a feeble attempt to cling to a crumbling empire, a last-ditch effort to maintain control over the narrative she had so carefully constructed. Her followers, many of whom had once idolized her, began to turn on her. Social media exploded. Her Instagram and Twitter flooded with comments, some of them angry, others disappointed, and a few, starkly and painfully, questioning everything they had believed in. "At Ava Turner, you are just like the rest of them. How could you ignore your workers like this? You're no better than the people you've been attacking for years. Hashtag Ava Turner exposed. I'm so heartbroken. I followed you because I thought you were the real deal. Turns out you were just selling us an image." Hashtag hypocrite. Even her closest allies began to distance themselves. Lily, the activist who had once been her confidant, tweeted, "I can't stand by someone who preaches about compassion and turns a blind eye to the suffering of the very people who make their success possible. I'm done." The media picked up the story quickly, amplifying the damage. Ava's name, once synonymous with change and justice, was now being used as an example of corporate greed masquerading as activism. The very people who had once elevated her were now pointing their fingers at her. Some of Ava's more loyal followers clung to her side, repeating her words, claiming the allegations were a deliberate attempt to smear her movement. But even they were beginning to falter. Ava watched as the engagement on her posts dwindled, her followers jumping ship one by one. The comments were no longer filled with praise, but with calls for accountability. Ava had always been able to control the narrative, to direct the conversation. But now, it seemed the conversation was slipping away from her. The pressure was building, and Ava knew it. She had tried to defend herself, to hold on to the facade that she was still the champion of justice. But the walls were closing in. The more she posted, the more she was scrutinized. She had become a symbol of everything she had once hated: greed, exploitation, and the exploitation of others for personal gain. As the days passed, Ava found herself retreating into isolation. The constant stream of messages, the relentless media coverage, and the glaring reality of her own mistakes began to take their toll. She had always prided herself on being the voice of the oppressed, but now, she was the one being scrutinized. The reckoning had arrived, and it was far more brutal than Ava had ever imagined. The pressure that had been mounting on Ava Turner for weeks now reached its peak. The world was watching, and her every move was being scrutinized. Her phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications from her PR team, her followers, and the media. Each new headline seemed to cut deeper into her public persona, and no amount of deflection or denial seemed to help. The battle was no longer just about her activism, it was about her credibility, her integrity, and the very foundation of everything she had built. Ava paced back and forth in her sleek apartment, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her chest. She had two choices: admit her mistakes and try to salvage what remained of her reputation, or double down on her beliefs, insist on her innocence, and risk losing everything she had worked for. Her mind raced as she replayed the events in her head, the interviews, the articles, the accusations. It was hard to escape the facts, the evidence was out there. She had been involved in the company's shady business practices, the worker exploitation. It was no longer a question of whether she had done something wrong, it was a question of how far she was willing to go to protect her brand. Her phone buzzed again. It was another message from Lily, the former ally turned critic. The message was simple but cutting: you need to face the truth, Ava, stop hiding behind your excuses. Ava stared at the message, her fingers trembling as she tapped out a reply: you don't understand. This isn't that simple. You don't know what it's like to be under the microscope every single day. I'm trying to fix this, but it's not all black and white. But deep down, she knew the truth was beginning to seep through the cracks. She had ignored the workers' plight, prioritized profits, and failed to live up to the values she had once so passionately espoused. It was time to make a decision. The next morning, Ava sat in front of a camera for an exclusive interview with a major news outlet. The weight of the moment hung over her. This was her chance to control the narrative, to speak directly to the public and either reclaim her position as an activist or further entrench herself as the hypocrite the world now saw her as. The host, a seasoned journalist with a no-nonsense attitude, welcomed Ava with a warm but skeptical smile. Ava Turner, she began, thank you for joining us today. As you know, the past few weeks have been challenging, to say the least. The allegations against you have shaken your credibility, and many of your followers feel betrayed. Can you explain why? Ava sat up straighter, trying to mask the tremble in her voice. She had prepared for this. She had run through the speech in her mind countless times, trying to find the right balance between humility and defiance. Her first instinct was to go on the offensive, to deny everything, to tell the world that this was just a smear campaign. But something inside her resisted. She opened her mouth and began to speak, her words coming out in a steady stream. I know that I've let many people down. I know that the accusations against me are serious, and I don't take them lightly. But what you need to understand is that this is a larger issue. I've spent my whole life fighting for animals, for the planet, and for justice. The exploitation that I've fought against is real. But yes, I've made mistakes. I've been blind to the things I should have seen. For a moment, she faltered, her eyes glossing over as she took a deep breath. The truth is, I've been so focused on the cause, on the bigger picture, that I allowed myself to overlook the very people who were working behind the scenes. I didn't listen when they raised their voices. I didn't act when I should have. And for that, I am truly sorry. The words felt hollow as they left her mouth, like an apology she didn't entirely believe herself. She had apologized for the sake of damage control, but the deep-seated anger and frustration still simmered beneath the surface. She wasn't entirely ready to take full responsibility. Not yet, Ava continued, her voice picking up steam. But let's be clear, the system that created these problems is still in place. The corporations that continue to profit off of exploitation are still out there, and they're still doing harm. I've made mistakes, yes, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm the only one responsible for the way things are. We have to fight the bigger fight, the one that goes beyond me, beyond my mistakes. The host nodded, but her tone was skeptical. Ava, you're asking people to trust you again, but many of your followers feel that they were misled. They believed in your message, and now they feel betrayed. How can you regain their trust? Ava paused, feeling the weight of the question. This wasn't just about winning back her reputation, It was about whether she could continue to lead a movement that had been so important to her. She hadn't realized how fragile everything was until now. "I'm going to do the work," she said, the words coming out with more resolve. "I'll support the workers, I'll be part of the change. I'll help build a more ethical industry. I won't run from this. I won't hide. I'm going to fix it, one step at a time." The interview continued, but Ava knew the damage had already been done. Her followers weren't fooled by her half-hearted apology. The public wasn't convinced. The comments on her social media exploded with mixed reactions. Some praised her for taking responsibility, while others criticized her for trying to redirect the focus away from her own actions. One comment summed it up perfectly: "Ava, you can apologize all you want, but the truth is, your actions speak louder than your words. You're not a hero anymore." Ava's PR team flooded her inbox with advice on how to manage the fallout, but even they knew it was too late. The more Ava tried to explain herself, the deeper the divide grew between her and her once loyal followers. The narrative was shifting, and Ava wasn't sure how to stop it. She could no longer hide behind her activism, no longer convince the world that she was the same righteous figure she had once been. She was fighting not just for her reputation, but for her very place in the movement she had helped to shape. And as the days passed, it became clear, the more she tried to apologize, the more she was exposed. Ava Turner's brand of activism had crumbled. And so had she. The fallout from Ava Turner's public apology was swift and unforgiving. For a brief moment, she thought that the media interviews and carefully crafted statements might help salvage what was left of her career. But as the dust settled, the truth was inescapable: the damage had already been done. The world, it seemed, had moved on. Her social media platforms, once vibrant with messages of support and activism, were now filled with biting criticism and demands for accountability. Followers who had once cheered her every post now questioned her integrity, asking how someone who claimed to fight for justice could so easily turn a blind eye to the suffering of those who made her success possible. The loyal base of followers who had clung to her side began to dwindle, leaving behind only a few die-hard supporters who continued to justify her actions, defending her with the same fervor they had once used to praise her. But they were a minority now, a dwindling group in a sea of disillusioned former fans. Even the brand she had worked so hard to build, a brand that promised ethical consumerism, sustainability, and animal rights, was beginning to unravel. Sponsorships and partnerships that had once lined her pockets were now pulling back. Vegan food companies and animal rights organizations that had previously aligned with her distanced themselves, their public statements a sharp contrast to the once celebrated collaboration. No one wanted to be associated with the controversy that followed Ava's name. The vegan food production company she had been tied to, Pure Plant Foods, was now facing its own reckoning. Investors were jumping ship, and the company's stock value plummeted. With the accusations of worker exploitation front and center, Pure Plant Foods struggled to defend its brand. Public pressure mounted as activists, former employees, and labor unions took to the streets demanding justice. Ava's involvement, once seen as a badge of honor for the company, had now become its greatest liability. Ava watched from the sidelines as everything she had worked for began to fall apart. The speeches, the interviews, the viral campaigns, all of it felt meaningless now. The fight she had fought for so long, against cruelty, against exploitation, seemed so hollow, so empty in the face of her own actions. Her own complicity had destroyed the very thing she had worked so tirelessly to protect. At night, Ava would sit alone in her apartment, the lights dimmed low, scrolling through her phone as the world's judgment passed over her like a tide. She found herself returning to the same comments again and again, reading through the voices of those who had once admired her. Some were angry, others disappointed, but a few felt almost resigned. One message stuck with her: "I can't believe I followed you. I thought you were better than this." It was a gut punch, a reminder that she wasn't just losing followers, she was losing herself. Her PR team continued to send her messages, offering advice on how to mitigate the damage, how to rebuild her brand, how to move on. But Ava couldn't shake the feeling that there was no coming back from this. The image she had worked so hard to cultivate, the persona of the righteous activist, was now shattered, and no amount of spin could fix it. The truth was out, and it was ugly. Ava tried to go through the motions, posting statements, responding to interviews, but each time she spoke, the words felt more disconnected from the person she had once been. In private, when the cameras were off, when the scripts were put away, Ava could no longer ignore the gnawing emptiness inside her. What was she doing all this for? Was she truly an activist, fighting for the greater good, or had she been playing a part in a story she had told herself, one where she was the hero? In those quiet moments, the questions became harder to ignore. Ava started to reflect on her motivations. She had always believed she was doing the right thing. She had convinced herself that her cause, the fight for animal rights, for the planet, for ethical living, was larger than any personal failings. But now, standing in the wreckage of her career, she couldn't help but wonder, had it all been about the image? Had it been about the recognition, the fame, the constant validation from her followers? Or had she truly believed in the cause from the start? She thought back to the early days, when her activism was raw, unfiltered. She had started out with a passion for change, a desire to make the world better. But somewhere along the way, somewhere between the viral videos, the brand deals, and the public appearances, the mission had become secondary. The recognition, the fame, the status, all of it had crept in, slowly, insidiously. In a way, she had become what she had once railed against, another face in the crowd, another voice shouting about justice while silently participating in the very systems of exploitation she claimed to fight. The realization hit her with an overwhelming force. Ava Turner, the vegan queen, had spent so long cultivating an image of moral superiority, she had forgotten what it was like to simply believe in something, without the fame, without the brand, without the applause. Her heart sank as she thought about the workers she had ignored, the very people she should have been protecting. They were still suffering, still toiling away in conditions she had allowed to persist for the sake of her career. She had been so focused on her own righteousness that she had lost sight of what mattered. Ava turned off her phone and sat in the darkness, her thoughts swirling. She had no answers, no solutions. She was just a person, a flawed human being who had once believed she was saving the world, only to realize she had been feeding her own ego. In the end, it wasn't just her career that had suffered. It was her very sense of self. She had become a symbol of the very hypocrisy she had fought so hard to expose. And now, with everything she had worked for slipping through her fingers, Ava was left to confront the question she had been avoiding for so long. Was she a true activist? Or was she just someone who had used a cause to create an image and a platform for her own success? The answer, Ava realized, was something she would have to live with for the rest of her life. Ava Turner sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the darkened city skyline outside her window. The world had been relentless in its criticism. The media, once a tool to amplify her message, now used her name to illustrate the dangers of hypocrisy in the activism world. Her career, once a shining beacon of success, now lay in ruins. But what haunted her more than the public fallout was the quiet echo of her own guilt, the feeling that she had failed not just her followers, but herself. For weeks, she had retreated from the spotlight, refusing to appear in public or post on social media. She no longer had the energy to fight the narrative that had taken hold of her. Every apology she made seemed to only deepen the divide, and every attempt at defending herself only made her look more desperate. There was no denying it, her empire had fallen. But as Ava sat in the silence, something shifted inside her. The weight of the past few months was immense, and she had been running from it, hiding from the truth that had been staring her in the face. She had tried to cling to the persona of the righteous activist, the leader who was always in the right, but that was a lie. The truth was, she had built her success on the very systems of exploitation she had once vowed to dismantle. The question had lingered in her mind for days. What now? Ava had spent so long pretending to have all the answers, selling her image as the perfect vegan activist. But now, with everything stripped away, she realized that her image was nothing more than a facade. She wasn't just fighting for the animals anymore. She was fighting for her own ego, her own recognition. The cause had taken a back seat to her desire for fame and influence. But could she redeem herself? Was it even possible? In the days that followed, Ava took a long, hard look at her past actions. She knew she could never fully undo the damage she had caused, but she could try to make amends. The workers she had ignored, the people who had been hurt by her inaction, had not been the faceless victims in her fight. They were real people, struggling every day for a fair wage and decent treatment, and she had turned her back on them. Ava began reaching out to the workers at Pure Plant Foods, the very people she had once brushed off as inconvenient to her brand's narrative. She contacted former employees who had spoken out against the company, offering them support in their fight for better working conditions. She apologized, sincerely, for her role in the exploitation. It wasn't easy. Some were skeptical, others angry, but a few accepted her apology and agreed to work with her to bring attention to the issues they had faced. She also reached out to organizations that had once supported her and now saw her as a liability. Ava knew she had to rebuild the trust that had been broken, not just with her followers, but with the very community she had been a part of. She agreed to work with labor rights groups, advocating for fair treatment of workers within the vegan food industry. She would take the lessons learned from her own mistakes and use them to push for change. In a public statement, Ava confessed the full extent of her failure. She acknowledged the harm she had caused by aligning herself with a company that had exploited workers, and she promised to do the work to fix the systemic issues within the food industry. The statement was raw, devoid of the PR spin she had relied on before. There were no excuses, no deflections, just a simple admission of her faults. "I failed to see the bigger picture," she said. "In my desire to fight for animals, I ignored the people who were being harmed in the process. And for that, I am sorry." The public response was mixed. Some felt her apology was sincere, and her efforts to make amends were commendable. Others dismissed her as a washed-up celebrity who was only attempting to salvage her image. The harsh comments still rolled in, but Ava no longer felt the need to defend herself. She knew that redemption, if it were to come, would not be easy or immediate. She couldn't erase the past, but she could work toward a better future. Ava's life slowly began to change in ways she hadn't expected. She still struggled with the guilt of her past, but she found a sense of peace in doing the right thing, however imperfectly she might do it. She didn't have the massive following she once enjoyed, but a small, dedicated group of people who believed in her efforts to make real change began to form around her. They weren't looking for a perfect activist, they were looking for someone who was willing to be honest, to admit mistakes, and to work toward a better world. Ava realized that she didn't need the spotlight to make a difference. She didn't need to be a brand, a symbol of perfect activism. What mattered now was the work, the tangible, sometimes messy work of making amends and fighting for the things that truly mattered. As she sat in her small office, surrounded by activists and labor advocates, working on a new campaign focused on ethical treatment for all workers in the food industry, Ava knew that she would never fully escape the past. But perhaps, in the process of confronting it head-on, she could build something more meaningful. Ava Turner would never be the icon she once was, the perfect, untouchable figure who had held the moral high ground. But perhaps, in the end, the new version of herself could still make a difference, one rooted in humility, honesty, and a commitment to real change. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but it was a path that felt, at least for the first time in years, like the right one. She had made mistakes, but for the first time, Ava was willing to face them. And in that honesty, there was the smallest flicker of hope for redemption.